The carton tilted. It was a tiny, almost unnoticeable movement, but in the silence of our kitchen, it felt like a gunshot. A few white drops of milk slipped over the rim of my father's cup, tracing a path down the side before pooling on the polished wood of the table. I froze, my breath caught in my chest, my knuckles white as I gripped the milk carton. The world seemed to stop, the ticking of the clock on the wall, the low hum of the refrigerator, even the sound of my own frantic heartbeat, it all vanished, replaced by a terrible, waiting quiet dot. My father's newspaper rustled. He lowered it slowly, his eyes, cold and hard as stones, fixing on the small white puddle. He didn't need to say a word. His gaze was enough. It was a look that stripped me bare, that reminded me of every mistake, every failure, every moment I had ever been a disappointment. Across the room, my mother glanced up from her phone, a small, cruel smirk playing on her lips. She leaned back against the counter, ready for the show to begin. This was her morning entertainment. "What the hell is wrong with you?" His voice wasn't just loud, it was a physical force, a boom that rattled my bones and made my throat clench shut. "Can you do one single thing without screwing it up?" "I'm sorry," the words tumbled out, a weak, shaky whisper. My hands trembled so violently that I could barely set the milk carton down. I grabbed a cloth from the sink, my movements clumsy with fear. "I'll clean it, I'm sorry." I kept my eyes on the table, on the spill, on anything but him. Looking at him always made it worse. It was like challenging a wild animal, but my apology was fuel to his fire. It never satisfied him. A loud bang echoed through the kitchen as his fist slammed onto the table, making the cups jump and rattle. In a flash, he was on his feet, his chair scraping loudly against the floor. My mother let out a small, amused chuckle from behind him, a sound that cut me deeper than his anger ever could. He turned to the stove, and my stomach plummeted into a cold, dark pit of dread. He grabbed the kettle, steam still curling lazily. From its spout, I backed away, my hands instinctively rising in a gesture of surrender. "Please," I begged, my voice cracking. "Please, I'll clean it up. It was just an accident." "Accident." He spat the word, his face twisting into a mask of pure disgust as he stalked toward me. The kettle in his hands seemed to pulse with heat. "You've been in accidents since the day you were born. Maybe some real pain will finally teach you not to waste what little you're given." My mind couldn't keep up. It was a slow-motion nightmare. I saw him tilt the kettle, saw the shimmering liquid arc through the air, but I couldn't move. I was paralyzed by the certainty of what was about to happen. Then, the boiling tea hit my hands. The pain was blinding, instantaneous, and absolute. A scream tore from my throat, a raw, animal sound I didn't recognize as my own. It felt like my skin was melting, like 1,000 white-hot needles were being driven into my flesh. I staggered backward, clutching my hands to my chest, my vision blurring with hot, helpless tears. The world dissolved into a haze of agony. The sting so sharp it stole the air from my lungs. And then I heard it, cutting through my sobs. Laughter. It was my mother. She hadn't moved an inch to help me. She hadn't even flinched. She simply took a slow sip of her own tea and spoke with a chilling calmness. "Pain will teach clumsy, useless hands. Maybe next time she'll learn." Their shared laughter filled the kitchen, sharp and brittle, echoing off the walls as I collapsed onto the cold tile floor. I shook uncontrollably, my hands a mess of red, blistering skin, my heart shattering into a million tiny pieces. In that moment, I wanted to disappear. I wanted to stop existing, not because of the searing burn, but because of the deeper, colder pain of knowing that the two people who were supposed to love and protect me only knew how to hurt me. They were my creators and my tormentors. That night, I sat alone in my dark room. The house was finally quiet. I had wrapped my hands in cool, damp cloths, but the throbbing was relentless. Tears slid silently down my cheeks, not from the pain anymore, but from the hollow ache in my chest. I stared up at the cracks in the ceiling, replaying the morning over and over in my head. Every word, every sneer, every time they had called me useless, clumsy, an accident. For years, I had believed them. For years, their words had been the truth of my world. But tonight, something was different. As I stared at my wrapped, throbbing hands, a new feeling began to smolder in the pit of my stomach, something that wasn't just hurt or anger. It was a cold, hard finality. I was done. I was done begging for a kindness they would never give. I was done apologizing for taking up space in their world. I was done letting them hold this power over me simply because they were my parents. They thought pain was a lesson. They thought pouring boiling tea on my skin would burn obedience into me forever. They were wrong. They had taught me a lesson, but not the one they intended. They had shown me that cruelty was their language. And in the silence of my room, I decided it was time I learned to speak it back to them. You want to teach lessons with pain? I whispered into the darkness, my voice raspy. My gaze fell upon my bandaged hands. Fine. One day, you'll learn your own lesson. And it won't be with fire. It'll be with loss. For the first time, a strange calm settled over me. I wasn't afraid of my father's next outburst. I wasn't afraid of my mother's mocking laughter. I was no longer their victim. I was planning. I was waiting for the day they would look at me and finally realize their reign of cruelty was over. A day where they would feel the soul-crushing weight of everything they had poured onto me, not through screams or burns, but through the vast, echoing emptiness of having no one left to hurt. I slowly clenched my fists, ignoring the sharp sting from my burns. These hands might have been useless to them, but one day, they would be strong enough to dismantle their entire world. The burns on my hands slowly healed, leaving behind shiny, pink scars that tightened when I flexed my fingers. Each pull of the skin was a physical reminder, a reminder of my father's rage, my mother's laughter, and the promise I had made to myself in the dark. A fire now burned inside me, a quiet, patient fire that was hotter than any tea they could ever pour. It was a fire they had ignited, but one they would never be able to put out. I began to see them with new eyes. Their cruelty wasn't random. It was a performance. It was about control. They needed me to be small so they could feel big. They needed me to be worthless so their own empty lives felt important. The insults, the threats, the casual disregard for my safety was all a carefully constructed cage to keep me broken. But I had discovered something on that cold kitchen floor. When you have nothing left to lose, pain doesn't make you obedient. It makes you dangerous. The days that followed looked the same on the surface. My father still grunted orders from behind his newspaper. My mother still found new ways to call me a waste of space. But I was different. I was watching them now, really watching. I became a ghost in my own home, moving silently, making myself as small and unnoticeable as possible. While they saw a defeated girl, I was a spy gathering intelligence. I saw the way my father puffed up his chest and put on the mask of a respectable, God-fearing family man whenever the neighbors were around. I heard the lies he told about how proud he was of me, how he was raising me right. I saw my mother at her church gatherings, clinging to her friends, painting a picture of a strict but loving home, sighing about how ungrateful children could be. Their entire existence was built on a foundation of appearances, a fragile lie held together by the power they wielded behind closed doors. They believed their power was absolute because they were certain no one would ever see the truth. My revenge couldn't be a simple act of defiance. Yelling or running away would only feed their narrative of me being a troubled, dramatic child. They would twist it, use it to gain sympathy. No, my revenge had to be something they couldn't talk their way out of. It had to be something they would feel in their bones, a slow, creeping dread that would mirror the years of fear I had endured. They said my hands were useless. I decided I would make theirs useless, too. They needed to know what it felt like, to lose control, to reach out for help and find nothing but air. So I began my quiet work. I didn't argue, I didn't fight back. I absorbed their insults like a stone, letting them think they had finally broken me. All the while, I was collecting their secrets, the official-looking envelopes they hid under the sofa cushions, the late-night phone calls where my father's voice dropped to a desperate whisper as he borrowed money he had no intention of repaying, the hushed, frantic conversations my mother had with her friends, begging for favors while pretending she was doing them a charity. They were a house of cards, already trembling from their own carelessness. They just didn't know I was there, ready to pull out the one card that would make it all collapse. I took on odd jobs. They knew nothing about cleaning houses after school, babysitting on weekends. Every dollar I earned was a brick in the foundation of my new life. Every coin I saved felt like a victory, a piece of my freedom I was buying back from them. The scars on my hands never let me forget why. This wasn't just about escaping. It was about ensuring that one day they wouldn't be able to lift a finger without remembering the agony they had so casually inflicted upon me. One night, long after the house had fallen silent, I stood in the kitchen alone. I stared at the stainless steel kettle, its surface so shiny it reflected my face. I no longer saw the frightened girl they loved to torment. I saw a stranger with cold, determined eyes. I reached out and traced the curve of the handle with my scarred fingertips. One day, I whispered to my reflection, "You'll have nothing left to hold. The world won't fear you. It will forget you." Years passed. My plan was a slow burn, just like the anger that fueled it. I eventually left that house, not by running away in the night, but by walking out the front door with a suitcase in my hand and a college acceptance letter in my pocket. They laughed, of course. They told me I'd be back within a month, begging for scraps. They believed I was incapable of surviving without them. They had taught me I was useless, and they believed their own lesson. They were wrong. I built a life they couldn't have imagined in their wildest dreams. I worked hard, not just at my studies, but at forging connections with people who saw me. Not the broken thing my parents had tried to create, but even with a new life and new friends, the scars on my hands remained. They were my permanent reminder of the vow I had made. They once told me pain would teach me a lesson. Now, it was my turn to be the teacher. My revenge, when it finally came, wasn't a storm. It was a quiet tide, pulling the ground out from under them so slowly they didn't realize they were drowning until the water was at their chins. Their perfect life had already begun to crumble on its own. My father's gambling debts caught up to him, and he lost his business. My mother's carefully cultivated social circle abandoned her as soon as their money ran out. Stripped of their wealth and status, they clung to their house as the last symbol of their power, the one place where they were still king and queen. That's when I made my final move. They never knew it, but through a series of quiet property acquisitions managed by a lawyer, I became their landlord. The day I signed the final paperwork, a grim satisfaction settled deep in my bones. The very walls that had witnessed my tears and my silent screams now belonged to me. I had a choice. I could have thrown them out immediately, but that was too quick. I let them stay. I let the bills pile up. I let the notices go unanswered. I wanted them to feel the creeping panic of losing control. I watched from a distance as the people who had mocked my every small mistake made catastrophic ones of their own. But now, there was no child to blame, no scapegoat to carry their shame. Finally, on a cold, rainy evening, I drove to their door. They looked smaller than I remembered, shrunken by failure and time. My father, whose booming presence once filled every room, was a slumped figure in a threadbare armchair. My mother's once smug face was etched with lines of exhaustion and bitterness. They weren't expecting me, but desperation is a powerful motivator. They let me in. "We just need a little more time," my father mumbled, his eyes fixed on the floor. "Things have been hard." I let my gaze travel around the room, landing on the doorway to the kitchen where my life had changed forever. My scarred hands rested on the back of a dusty chair. The silence stretched, thick and heavy, until they began to shift uncomfortably. "You told me my hands were useless," I said at last. My voice was calm, cold, and steady. "You burned me to teach me a lesson. Do you remember that?" A flicker of something's fear, shame, maybe passed over my father's face before he hardened it again. My mother pressed her lips into a thin, white line, while I continued, taking a step closer. "These useless hands own this house now. These useless hands built a life you can't touch, and tonight, these hands are taking back every single thing you ever used to hurt me." Confusion warred with dawning horror on their faces. "You can't," my father started, his voice a pathetic echo of its former power. "I can," I cut him off, my voice like ice. "You are no longer welcome here. You taught me what it feels like to have nowhere safe to go. You let a child suffer in agony while you sat warm inside, laughing. Tonight, you get to learn that lesson for yourselves." I walked to the front door and opened it, letting the cold, damp air rush in. I turned to look at them one last time. "Pack what you can carry. By midnight, this shelter is gone. You wanted to teach with pain. Consider this your final exam." Hours later, I returned. I found them on the curb, huddled together under a sputtering street lamp, their meager belongings in soaked bags at their feet. The rain plastered their hair to their heads. They looked exactly as they had made me feel my entire life, small, powerless, and utterly alone. I walked past them without a word, unlocked the door to my house, and stepped inside. For the first time, The kitchen didn't feel like a war zone. It felt like freedom. I filled the kettle, the very same one, with fresh water. I waited for it to boil, then poured the steaming water slowly, carefully, into a cup. I sat at the table in the quiet, empty house, the warmth of the mug seeping into my scarred hands, and I knew the hands they had called useless had finally taken back everything. They had left my creators with nothing but the cold, wet, dark, and a lasting lesson they so richly deserved.